Was the move about getting away from the UK press, because the press is, is everywhere, or was the move because you weren't getting enough support from the firm?
It was both.
Both.
I needed to do this for my family. This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's, and for Archie's as well, because I could see where this was headed.
They didn't want him to be a prince or a princess, not knowing what the gender would be, which would be different from protocol, and that he wasn't going to receive security.
What?
It was really hard. Look, I was really ashamed to say it at the time, and ashamed to have to admit it to Harry, especially, because I know how much loss he's suffered. But I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it.
Harry believed the greatest danger to his royal future was already behind him. But Tom Bower's newest concern suggested something far more permanent was quietly taking shape. A palace strategy that would not publicly punish Harry, yet could gradually make his return to royal life almost impossible. This was not another warning about a bitter conversation, another private disagreement, or another explosive headline that might disappear within days. Bower's concern went deeper. It suggested that Harry could be approaching a moment when his future inside the monarchy was being decided without his participation, not through one dramatic order, but through a steady sequence of choices made behind closed doors. That was what made it so unsettling. Harry's royal blood could never be removed. He would always be the king's son, Diana's child, and William's brother. But blood and position were no longer the same thing. Access could change. Influence could fade. Ceremonial importance could be reassigned. Responsibilities once connected to Harry could quietly move to others until there was nothing obvious left to restore. For years, Harry may have believed time remained on his side. However damaged his relationship with King Charles became, there was always the possibility that father and son might eventually soften. A private meeting, a period of silence, a family crisis, or simply the passing of time could reopen doors that had seemed closed. That hope depended on one crucial assumption, that the palace would leave his former place waiting. Bower's warning challenged exactly that. The monarchy does not like empty spaces. It values continuity, predictability, and stability. When one person steps away, duties continue. Patronages move. Ceremonial positions are filled. Residences find new purposes. Symbolic responsibilities slowly become associated with someone else. At first, such decisions may look temporary. But once they become part of the institution's normal rhythm, reversing them becomes far more difficult. That was the possibility capable of stunning Harry. His problem was no longer limited to Charles, past interviews, memoirs, or unresolved anger. The real question concerned the monarchy that could exist 5, 10, or 20 years from now. And hanging over that future was William. If palace planners were already looking beyond the present reign, then one calculation mattered more than every public argument Harry had fought: whether he still belonged in the monarchy's long-term design at all. And according to Bower, the answer may already be taking shape behind palace doors, because the institution has begun planning not for Harry's return, but for a future in which it no longer needs one. The most dangerous development was not a statement from Charles or another confrontation with William. It was something quieter. Every year Harry remained outside royal life, another responsibility was absorbed, another ceremonial gap was filled, and another reason for the palace to bring him back quietly disappeared. At first, those changes could be explained as temporary. Someone had to attend the engagements. Someone had to represent the crown. Someone had to carry responsibilities Harry once might have expected to keep. But temporary arrangements have a way of becoming permanent when they work. William and Catherine carried more weight. Anne remained dependable. Edward and Sophie became increasingly important, and with time, even the younger generation would begin moving toward roles that once seemed reserved for Harry's era. That was the deeper danger Bowers' warning exposed. Harry could once think of himself as simply absent from the royal machine, someone who had stepped away, but whose space still existed somewhere inside it. Now the possibility was much harsher. The machine was being redesigned around his absence. The monarchy has survived for generations because it adapts. It absorbs shocks, redistributes pressure, and continues. The more smoothly it functions without Harry, the harder it becomes to argue that his return is institutionally necessary. His absence stops looking like a crisis. It becomes routine, and routine can be brutal. Behind palace walls, the question may no longer be, when might Harry come back? The more practical question becomes, who will perform these duties if he never does? Once that shift happens, power moves with it. Ceremonial responsibilities can settle elsewhere. Military associations can become emotionally attached to different members of the family. Charitable relationships can build new loyalties. Public duties that once reinforced Harry's importance can gradually become part of somebody else's identity. For Harry, that would be more painful than losing a single privilege. It would mean watching his royal relevance being transferred piece by piece without any dramatic moment he could confront. And time only makes the problem larger. Eventually, George, Charlotte, and Louis will grow into adulthood. New expectations will surround them. A younger generation will begin occupying the spaces closest to the future crown. That creates a clock Harry cannot easily stop. He may still reconcile with his father. Family wounds can soften. Private relationships can recover. But institutional restoration is different. Every year that passes creates new arrangements, new loyalties, and new reasons not to reverse course. That is where Bowers' warning becomes far more personal, because Harry's future may not ultimately be decided by the father he hopes to reconcile with, but by the brother whose vision of the monarchy could change everything. For Harry, Charles represents family history, unresolved affection, and perhaps one final path back toward the palace. William represents something else entirely. Bowers' concern is that once the crown passes to Harry's brother, sentiment may matter less than stability, and old wounds could suddenly become constitutional realities. That shift would change far more than the name of the monarch. It would move the entire center of gravity inside the royal family. Under Charles, Harry could still look toward his father and imagine that affection, memory, or regret might eventually create room for compromise. Under William, the calculation could become colder. A king would not only be judging a brother, he would be protecting a crown. William's responsibilities would stretch far beyond personal feeling. Catherine's position would matter. George's preparation for the future would matter. The stability of the institution, the confidence of advisors, and the image of a disciplined monarchy would all become part of the same equation. And that is where Harry could be making a dangerous assumption. He may still see William through the lens of their shared past, two brothers shaped by the same palace walls, the same expectations, and the same devastating loss of Diana. Yet those memories do not automatically create reconciliation. In some families, shared pain brings people closer. In others, it makes betrayal feel deeper because each person believes the other should have understood. Bowers' concern pushes that tension into the future. William could decide that the monarchy he inherits must be smaller, tighter, and more controlled. In such a system, there may be little space for a prince whose relationship with the institution remains uncertain. That would create a distinction Harry might find especially painful. William could accept him as a brother without restoring him as a working royal. Harry might still be invited to private family occasions. He could attend important ceremonies. He could remain connected by blood, title, and history. Yet at the same time, he could be kept away from sensitive discussions, future planning, ceremonial decisions, and the machinery that actually determines how the crown operates. That would not look like exile. In many ways, it could feel worse. Harry would remain close enough to see the institution functioning, but distant enough to have no meaningful influence over where it was going. And once William's reign established that boundary, reversing it could become extraordinarily difficult. Then another layer enters the story. Because separating family from institution becomes far more complicated when the issue is not simply duty, but inheritance, especially objects carrying Diana's memory. Because Harry's royal future is not measured only in balconies, uniforms, and ceremonies, some of the deepest tensions are tied to inheritance, royal property, and the objects carrying memories the palace can never completely control. Behind the public arguments lies a quieter issue with enormous emotional weight: inheritance. Not simply money, but letters, jewels, residences, archives, military objects, and pieces connected to Diana. Bower's warning raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when Harry remains family by blood but stands outside the royal system, controlling them? That question becomes complicated because royal inheritance is rarely as simple as one person leaving possessions to another. Some objects may be personal. Others can belong to the crown, the royal collection, estates, trusts, or arrangements governed by rules far older than the people currently arguing over them. For Harry, that distinction could feel painfully cold. A piece connected to his mother might carry enormous private meaning, yet still sit within a structure he does not control. And Diana changes everything. To Harry, her letters, photographs, jewels, and personal objects would never be ordinary possessions. They represent memory, grief, identity, and a bond no institution can fully define. But inside the monarchy, some of those same objects can carry another meaning: history, continuity, public symbolism, and royal ownership. That is where the idea of forbidden jewels becomes so powerful. Certain pieces may be too sensitive, too politically charged, or too deeply tied to royal history to move like normal family heirlooms. Their significance could make them effectively untouchable, preserved not because emotion does not matter, but because the institution believes its claim is larger than any individual relationship. For Harry, the danger is not simply losing access to an object. It is losing influence over the story attached to it. If he remains outside the royal structure, future exhibitions, commemorations, archives, and official presentations could be shaped without him. Diana's memory might still be honored, but not necessarily in the way Harry would choose. His emotional ownership could remain intense, while his institutional power becomes almost non-existent. And that creates another painful question. What would Archie and Lilibet inherit from this history? They may inherit names, titles, family stories, and a blood connection to one of the world's most famous dynasties. But if their father remains distant from the machinery of monarchy, how much of that heritage would they actually experience rather than simply hear about? Harry could begin to realize that inheritance is not only about what is passed down. It is also about access, belonging, and who gets to shape the meaning of the past. And that possibility transforms Bower's warning from a problem about Harry alone into something far more consequential. A question about whether the Sussex children will grow up connected to royal history, or permanently standing beyond its gates. Harry could endure losing another title, another invitation, or another ceremonial privilege. But Bowers' warning becomes devastating when the consequences move to the next generation. Archie and Lilibet carry royal blood and royal titles, yet their future connection to the monarchy may depend on decisions being made while they are still children. That changes the emotional weight of everything. Harry's struggle is no longer only about whether he will ever return to a meaningful royal role. It becomes about what kind of relationship his children will inherit with the family and institution that shaped his entire life. Titles can survive on paper. Bloodlines can be traced for generations. But neither creates closeness on its own. Without regular contact, shared family moments, ceremonial experience, or a natural relationship with their royal cousins, Archie and Lilibet could grow up connected to the monarchy mainly by name. Their place might remain technically significant while becoming emotionally distant. The contrast with George, Charlotte, and Louis would only sharpen that divide. William's children are growing up surrounded by the customs, expectations, and responsibilities of royal life. They are learning the rhythms of the institution not from books or headlines, but from experience. Over time, that difference becomes harder to ignore. Harry may once have believed his children could decide for themselves when they were older. Perhaps they could step closer to royal life when they were ready. But Bowers' concern suggests that some doors are shaped long before adulthood. Relationships have to be built. Trust has to develop. A sense of belonging cannot always be created years later simply because a title still exists. That thought could become painful in ways Harry never expected. One day, Archie or Lilibet might ask why so much of their family history came to them through photographs, public stories, or distant ceremonies rather than memories of their own. And Harry would have to confront whether the distance had protected them, or quietly cost them something. From the palace perspective, the calculation could become even colder. Future monarchies may focus increasingly on direct heirs and active working royals. Branches that remain physically and institutionally distant could slowly move further from the center. That leaves Harry trapped between two risks. Push too aggressively for recognition, and tensions could deepen. Stay quiet, and the separation may become permanent. Bowers' darkest concern is that no one may ever announce when that point has been reached. That invisible deadline may be the most dangerous part of all. Because palaces rarely announce when a door has permanently closed, they simply stop preparing for the day someone might walk through it again. No document needs to declare Harry finished. No courtier needs to announce a ban. Bowers' concern is colder than that. The monarchy can close a chapter through silence, allowing appointments, traditions, relationships, and succession planning to move forward until Harry discovers that the future once waiting for him no longer exists. That is the danger of an institutional point of no return. Royal roles are not preserved in empty rooms, waiting untouched for someone to reclaim them. Responsibilities move. Ceremonial duties are reassigned. Patronages develop new relationships. Security structures adapt. Staff build routines around the people who are actually present. And once those arrangements begin working successfully, reversing them becomes far more complicated than simply welcoming Harry back through a palace door. Restoration would mean disturbing an entire system that has learned to function without him. That is why silence may become more powerful than confrontation. Harry may never receive one dramatic summons, one final meeting, or one cold sentence declaring that his former place is gone. Instead, the answer could emerge slowly through future calendars that no longer include him. Patronage strategies designed around other royals, security plans built on his continued separation, and succession preparations that increasingly treat his absence as permanent rather than temporary. For Harry, that would be especially difficult to fight. Public criticism can be challenged. Family arguments can soften. Even bitter personal wounds can sometimes heal. But bureaucratic momentum has no emotion to negotiate with. Once an institution begins planning 5, 10, or 20 years ahead, sentiment carries far less weight than stability. Anne represents that ruthless continuity better than almost anyone. Her entire royal life has been shaped by duty, repetition, and the understanding that the crown survives by continuing its work regardless of private turmoil. From that perspective, the monarchy cannot remain frozen while Harry waits for the perfect emotional breakthrough. It must keep moving. And that creates the most unsettling contrast of all. Harry may still imagine one conversation capable of changing everything, while the palace measures its future in decades, not headlines. By the time George becomes a senior working royal, the responsibilities once associated with Harry could already belong to a younger generation with its own loyalties, experience, and public identity. That may be the miscalculation Bowers sees beneath everything else. Royal blood can preserve a title, but it cannot force an institution to preserve a function. Harry may remain part of the family tree forever, while watching his practical relevance quietly disappear. And that leads directly to Bowers' harshest conclusion. Harry may never stop being a prince by birth, but the monarchy could still reach a point where being a prince no longer guarantees him any meaningful place inside it. This is the distinction Harry may never have expected to confront. Blood makes him royal. History makes him Diana's son. A title preserves his connection to the dynasty. But none of those things automatically guarantee influence, access, ceremony, trust, or a future role. And Bauer believes that difference is becoming impossible to ignore. For most of Harry's life, those two identities seemed inseparable. He was a son, a brother, a grandson, and at the same time a working part of an institution older than almost every personal conflict surrounding it. That combination shaped how he understood himself. Family and monarchy appeared connected. But the crown survives precisely because it can separate the two when necessary, even when that separation cuts deeply. That is where the future becomes uncomfortable. Harry could one day rebuild private relationships with his father, William, or other relatives, and still remain outside the machinery of monarchy. A family invitation would not necessarily mean an official role. A private conversation would not restore ceremonial authority. Reconciliation, if it comes, could be real emotionally while remaining extremely limited institutionally. The consequences would become most painful at the moments when monarchy is most visible. Coronations, funerals, state ceremonies, military commemorations, weddings, future milestones involving George and the generation moving closer to the center of royal duty. Harry might attend some of those occasions as family while watching others stand where he once stood, not because his blood had changed, but because his function had. That difference could carry a psychological sting no title can soften. To sit among guests while former equals perform official duties around the sovereign would make the separation impossible to disguise. And beneath that tension remains Diana. Harry has repeatedly carried his own understanding of his mother's life, pain, and legacy. Yet the institution will continue preserving its own version of royal history, with or without his agreement. That leaves him facing a choice far more personal than any palace dispute. He can continue challenging the monarchy from outside, protecting his independence but potentially deepening the distance. Or he can attempt to rebuild trust slowly, without demanding guarantees the palace may never offer. There may be no promise of restoration, no assurance that the old position is waiting. That is why Bowers' warning becomes so severe. Harry may not be facing an ultimatum delivered across a palace desk. He may be facing something harder, the need to decide what kind of royal future he wants before institutional momentum quietly decides it for him. Because beneath the titles, jewels, grievances, and palace calculations lies one final question, and Harry may now realize that avoiding it for much longer could mean losing the chance to answer it himself. Bowers' warning does not end with Harry being stripped of anything. It ends with something psychologically harder: choice. Harry may still have time to influence how his royal story concludes, but every possible path demands a sacrifice, and none can restore the world that existed before the family fractured. That is what makes this moment so defining. Harry is not carrying one identity, but three, and each pulls him in a different direction. He is the son of the king, tied permanently to the institution he challenged. He is the brother of the future king, bound to William by blood, even as distance hardens between them. And he is a father determined to build a different life for Archie and Lilibet, one less controlled by the expectations that shaped his own childhood. Moving emotionally back toward the family would not be simple. It could require restraint when anger feels easier, patience when answers are demanded immediately, and trust rebuilt quietly rather than through public declarations. Most painfully, it may require Harry to accept that reconciliation does not automatically restore privileges, ceremonial roles, or the influence he once held. Remaining outside offers freedom. It gives him independence from palace expectations and the ability to shape his own public identity. But independence carries another risk. Over time, his branch of the family could become connected to monarchy mainly through history rather than participation. Archie and Lilibet could inherit names, memories, and royal blood without inheriting any meaningful place in the institution itself. That may be the deepest emotional question Harry faces. Is preserving every grievance worth risking the future connection his children might one day want? And inevitably, that question leads back to William. Any lasting restoration may depend on two brothers confronting wounds that neither has been willing or perhaps able to surrender. Titles cannot solve that. Neither can ceremony. Jewels can survive centuries. Inheritance can move from one generation to another. Titles can remain preserved in official records, and photographs can maintain the appearance of unity long after relationships have fractured. But trust is different. Once it disappears, no crown, medal, or family name can recreate it instantly. That is why Bowers' new concern feels larger than any current dispute. Harry may still be fighting today's arguments, while the monarchy is quietly organizing tomorrow. And the palace does not need to formally exile him. Time can do it. Succession can do it. Institutional change can do it. The final mystery is whether Harry moves before that invisible deadline arrives, or whether the next great royal chapter begins with William on the throne and Harry realizing that his place was removed without anyone ever announcing it. And if Bowers' warning is correct, the next move will not simply determine whether Harry reconciles with his family. It could decide whether future generations remember him as the prince who found his way back, or the prince whose royal future quietly vanished while everyone was watching.